This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Lisa Abramowicz along with Tom Keene and Jon Ferro. Join us each day for insight from the best in economics, geopolitics, finance, and investment. Subscribe to Bloomberg Surveillance on demand on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts. And always on Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app. Let's get to it. It is an important conversation on a day devoted to celebrating retail sales. Let's head over to Macy's in New York City's Herald Square, where Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde is joined by the company's CEO, Jeff Gennette. Caroline.
Lisa and Gina, it's a joy to be with you, with Jeff Gennette, of course, on a day where people queue, they run in, the celebration is upon us, your Super Bowl. What are they buying today for Black Friday?
So they're buying everything on their gift list. And they're buying, that's really generally in luxury. So fine jewelry, they're buying cashmere, they're buying outerwear for the entire family. Hostess gifts in our home store, but they're also home prep. We've got great deals, as we always do for Black Friday, going all the way through the holiday season. So we are ready. We've got all of our key items, loaded to bear. Here we are in Herald Square. It was a good opening. We had a great day online yesterday during Thanksgiving.
I mean, you said that on your earnings, which were, about a week ago.
Yes.
That this gets earlier and earlier.
It does.
Black Friday, the competition. How important are the next few days and the run up to the holidays?
Oh, it's still very important. So, when you think about kind of Black Friday deals really started right after Halloween is when they started. But this is still a pilgrimage. You've got, America is traveling and they are in homes and they're coming into stores just like this one today. They're online. They've been online all the way through. So it's very, very important. So when we look at kind of Black Friday through Cyber Week, then we go into a lull. It's like 10 days where people kind of reset. And then those last 10 days become increasingly important. So it's one of the three stages right now that we are at the kind of the Christmas shopping is the one we're in right now, the first.
What, of course, your earnings showed so clearly is that it's about inventory management in many ways at the moment, and you've been managing to ace that. How are you ensuring you got the right thing at the right time for a consumer that basically we're all trying to understand right now?
So obviously the consumer's under pressure, but they still love gifts. And so we want to make sure that we've got all the right gifts and we've got all the right stock content in them. So I just walked this entire store to really understand where we are in all of the content across all of our categories, and we're in great shape. And that's really in tribute to the amount of work we've been putting in inventory control.
And when it comes to online versus in store, in retail, this is how you've been shifting the company. In particular, people aren't perhaps having the footfall in malls, they're coming to one-off stores, they're going to smaller store experiences, but e-commerce has just been the focus. How are you managing to be at the right time in the right place for an omni-channel purchaser?
So really, the strength of Macy's and Bloomingdale's and Bluemercury is that we're omni-channel and we're omni-category. So what you have is you have customers that are shopping online, they want to come into a store and try it on, and they maybe are transacting on the couch later that night. So the opportunity to make it as convenient for the customer as possible, however and whenever they want to shop. So that's our beauty, and doing that with a national footprint, with a great website, is what we depend on.
And of course, why you've got such a great bird's eye perspective, because you do have Bloomingdale's for the higher end, more luxury purchaser, and then more income breadth when it comes to Macy's. What are we seeing in terms of the consumer? Are they going to be spending more? Are they going to be pulling back?
So you do have customers that are under pressure. And so when you think about the inflation is still high, it's abating from the change of the inflation rate from last year, but it's still higher than it was last year. And customers have got a limited budget. Some of it is they're spending it in experiences and then in our discretionary categories. So we want to make sure that we've got the right price points across that entire spectrum. But you still give gifts. And this is where Macy's and Bloomingdale's and Bluemercury shine. So when you have this gift, somebody on your gift list, we're going to have the right content for you at the right price point. And we spend from when Black Friday ends to where we are right now, we've been spending a year getting ready for that. And we do trial runs on Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day to make sure we've got the right gifts. We're ready.
You're ready. People are worried, analysts might be worried, that you're kind of managing decline at the moment. What would you say to a comment like that?
Look, I think that if we weren't a department store today, we would invent one. So the idea about having multi-categories, being able to do that in multi-channels, we now have been able to get new categories in as a result of Marketplace, which is now online at both Bloomingdale's and in Macy's. So I bet on department stores, and obviously I made my career doing this. And it is it's still very, very relevant. We're obviously looking at where traffic is moving from on-mall to off-mall. We're obviously testing that in both Bloomingdale's with the Bloomies format and with Macy's with Macy's. And so we're going to be ready for where the customer is evolving. And we've got very strong assets to be able to do that, both on mall and obviously online.
Evolving into a world where we're all using chatbots and artificial intelligence are front and center. Are these the sort of areas of investment?
Yes, absolutely. Because when you think about AI and machine learning, you think about when we have 40 million customers at Macy's, 4 million at Bloomingdale's, we know them very well. So to have all that data and be able to start to personalize content and values for those customers is where this is all going. How do you make your brand more relevant? And that is at a customer level. It's no longer broad-based promotion. It's the opportunity to be able to, I know Caroline, and based on what you buy, what you might be interested in, and to be able to serve that up in the way you want it served up is really the secret of success for an omnichannel retailer going forward.
You, of course, just mentioned throughout your career this is what you've been doing.
Yes.
For those who don't realize, you've worked at the Macy's brand for more than 40 years.
Yes.
And this is your last Black Friday.
Yes.
And of course, CEO since 2017. You have been thought of as a turnaround focus, the polarist, the way in which you have thought about personalization to e-commerce. You weathered, of course, the COVID in and of itself. Do you feel that you've got this Macy's where you want it to be as you look towards this being your last Black Friday? Yeah, look, when I reflect back on my career, and certainly in my time as CEO, I didn't accomplish everything that was on my list. But look, the focus on relevant content, on amazing values, and on customer experience is clearly the path forward, and I couldn't be more excited about my successor, who is more than ready to be able to do this. He knocked the cover off the ball with respect to Bloomingdale's and what he was able to do there, how he was able to kind of help turn around the strategy of Bluemercury. He's now going to do that for Macy's Inc. So he's got a good game plan, and he's going to make it better. Jeff Gennette, we thank you so much for spending time with us on what is your last Black Friday, but still got a few more days in there. And of course, the job, he's here until February as the CEO and CEO-elect Tony Spring. But with that, we send it back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde and Macy's CEO Jeff Gennette on his last Black Friday on the floor talking about the importance of gifts. Joining us to give us his review of the scene from White Plains, Joe Feldman, Senior Research Analyst and Assistant Director of Research at Telsey Advisory Group. This is sort of the tradition. You wake up early, I assume, and you go out to see what's going on in the different stores. Can you just give us a rundown of what your first take is this year?
Yeah, so I did get up early, as you said, part of the tradition, and it was very quiet out there. I was in a Best Buy and a Target so far. Not too many stores are open yet. Best Buy, Target, Dick's Sporting Goods were all open around 6 a.m. And the traffic is light. They're all ready for the Black Friday day. They're well stocked. The signage was great. A lot of employees in the store, just not a lot of people yet. And I think that's because you can get a lot of the goods and those prices earlier. I mean, you could have gotten it yesterday online. You could have gotten it the past week, really. At a lot of these stores, they started their Black Friday sales much earlier than we've seen in the past. And I think that's, just elongating the season and also less of a rush to get out first thing in the morning for that doorbuster.
Joe, I want to really key in on this idea that many of the retailers are not open yet, because my recollection is over the last couple of years, we were extending the opening hours among retail. We had a lot of retailers even opening a few years ago on Thanksgiving as opposed to waiting to open early on Black Friday. What's the change here? Is it really just the overall extension of the season and the advent of online retail as a really critical component of our shopping strategy? Or is there a labor component to this? Is there something to do with lack of labor, lack of available labor, and also some pushback from labor as to what they're willing to do?
I think that's a great point, because I do think that labor isn't a component here, where, the retailers have decided that, look, given the volumes that they've seen in the past couple of years, and maybe it's better to treat their employees better and, maybe not have everybody out at midnight on Black Friday, or even, at the end, 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving, like we saw several years ago, where the traffic into the stores just wasn't enough to warrant A, spending on the labor, and B, giving labor a break and giving the store employees a chance to rest and enjoy the holiday with their families and then come in refreshed for the next day. I do think that by elongating the season, that helped alleviate some of that stress and puts less emphasis on just this Black Friday alone. I do think we're going to see a pretty decent day in the malls later and out in the stores, and for the whole weekend. But again, it's just a longer period that we're seeing.
Okay, so a decent day today, a decent weekend potentially. What does that mean for that longer period? What are you expecting for holiday sales? We had a pretty good conversation with Wells Fargo earlier this morning. They're looking at 5% retail sales growth, which frankly doesn't sound too bad. Given long-term average pace of sales growth this time of year is about 4. That sounds pretty decent, pretty optimistic. What are you at Telsey Group thinking?
Yeah, the 5% seems a little bit optimistic, but we've seen quite a few people with, estimates somewhere in that 3 to 5% area. At Telsey Advisory Group, our formal estimate is 3.5 to 4%. Okay. We did it two ways. We looked at it bottom up, just like looking at all the forecasts for the companies. We also looked at it top down, just looking at the macro data of all the U.S. government retail sales. 3.5%, 4%. We felt like, as you said, that 4% or so is kind of the long-term average, and it feels like this is going to be a bit more of a normal year like that.
So, Joe, I got to be honest, the main topic of discussion at my household for Thanksgiving was generative AI and how it's going to transform our world. I know it sounds like a scintillating holiday discussion, but I'm curious from your vantage point.
Lisa has a particularly nerdy house.
100%.
Okay.
It's okay. I embrace it, but I'm curious, how much that's changing the way people shop. I mean, given the fact that a third of people, respondents to the survey that I was reading, are using some generative AI to figure out how to shop. I mean, how is this shifting the way that some of these companies really try to cater to their customers?
So I think the retailers are starting to embrace it. It still feels very early for it, though. And the quality of the generative AI, the responses you get is somewhat mixed. But the retailers are working aggressively to try to help, do things more efficiently for their own organizations and also serve the customer better. If you think about the chatbots that you get when you go online, or, maybe if the large language model generative AI have more natural responses and better quality responses. I think that's coming. It's not quite here yet, but people are embracing it. And I think that the retailers are all trying to get there. But it's really, I think, a couple of years away before we're going to see a major impact from it.
Although, if you take it a step further, Joe, there was something else, just sort of in the catastrophic realm of talk, which is also, it makes dinners really exciting. I'm curious about, what this means for the employment picture. We're talking about labor, and it's actually very much connected to what you were just talking about with Gina. You don't have to pay a robot to work during the holidays. How much is there this feeling of, cash registers that are self-checkout, different programs that can do personal shopping for you? I mean, there's an evolution to this that can really cut back some of the base costs for these retailers. How much are we seeing that in the stores at this point?
At this point, I think it's still relatively low because of that particular technology, generative AI. But I do think that we have seen technology reduce costs for retailers, make them run more efficiently. We've seen, as you mentioned, automated self-checkout or assisted self-checkout now. You can have one person manning 5 or 6 registers at the same time. It's a lot more efficient, and then you can get people onto the floor to help the customers. You can stock the aisles better. So there's a lot that you can do. And then on the back end, just on the supply chain side, there's so much you can do. Now, retailers have been embracing AI and machine learning for years. The generative part is where it's new, and that's still yet to come. And my understanding is a lot of the retailers they're still staffing up. They still need the people to even be able to harness it, and the data, the software engineers to really write the code and to really embrace it. And, I do think there's an important element here where people are so crucial to the system, because it does create those jobs for people, maybe more skilled labor on the software engineering side. Also, within the store, you still want customer-facing people. You still want people to help the customer. And so I think it just changes the tasks for labor within the store rather than necessarily cut labor too thin.
Joe, can we talk a little bit about the broader competitive landscape for a retailer right now? Because I'm struck by this idea that consumers are still very focused on experiences, on spending on services, on going to restaurants. How are retailers thinking about not just their competition with their fellow retail, but their general competition for consumer dollars in an environment where consumers are clearly preferring to go and spend on services relative to goods?
Yeah, I think the retailers are doing two things. One is they're trying to create a more exciting environment and more of an experience itself within the store, or if you're shopping online, have a more efficient experience, a better, fun experience, one of discovery, treasure hunt to some extent at some stores. The other part is innovation. Whenever we see innovation in products, whether it's apparel, furnishings or electronics, the consumer tends to respond. And so, when we have had that innovation, the consumer responds. We're trying to push innovation a bit more from the retail side. But I do think the retailers have been very prudent in their outlook, understanding that services spending is still, recovering actually from where, to get back to even pre-pandemic levels. So we're not fully there yet. So I think the assumption is that you will see continued spending on services. The retailers are just trying to find a way to create exciting merchandise to get people to buy that at the same time. And that's also why I think we're going to see a decent holiday season, because the consumer has money. They're just spending in different pockets right now. And I think that selective or choiceful spending, as some have said, is really where you can see that shift. Now the time is, the holiday season, gift giving. I think that's where you're going to see that shift back. Maybe come first quarter, winter, people want to get away. Travel starts to happen again with school breaks in the February, March time period.
Joe Feldman, thank you so much for being with us. Happy holidays. Joe Feldman of Telsey Advisory Group, thank you for being with us. Justin Wolfer is professor of economics at the University of Michigan, taking a look at Thanksgiving disinflation, saying, while the cost of living is up and consumer perception is that everything is more expensive, the price of your holiday dinner actually fell from a year ago. The price of turkey down more than 5%, stuffing down almost 3%, cranberries down 18%. Pumpkin pie lovers, though, that price up almost 4%. I did make a pumpkin pie, and actually I did notice that. Justin joining us now. Justin, it's interesting that you put this out. It seems like, yes, it is interesting just on the face level of Thanksgiving, but there's a deeper message here about kind of where there is disinflation and how that isn't necessarily showing up in consumer sentiment. What's your take on that?
Lisa, I'm glad you saw the deeper message. Look, the deeper message was almost a form of performance art. I pretended to care about these individual prices. The reality is, if you want to track the cost of living, what you need to do is go and visit hundreds of supermarkets from dozens of cities and sample thousands of goods and have very sophisticated computers to put it all together. And thank goodness we have someone who does that for us called the BLS. And instead, what we get every year, and basically every news cycle, is some interest group or one side of the political spectrum or another will pretend to obsess and pretend to care about things like the price of turkeys. And actually, the graphic you just showed, I think, was a beautiful teaching point, because it's always the case that whether inflation's 2% or whether it's 4%, that there's a bunch of stuff going up a fair bit. And right there, you've got that pumpkin pie mix. And I noticed bread rolls are a little bit more expensive too. And you've got a bunch of stuff going down, like the price of fresh cranberries. Turkey prices are plummeting because, the bird flu's a bit behind us. And so trying to tell the story of the whole economy through graphics like this, and I'm not having a go at Bloomberg because you were honest about it, Lisa, but often the major cable networks are not, is an absurd way of trying to track the macro economy. Let's focus on the data instead.
Justin, you correctly note that also airline costs are going down. So the cost of services is intriguingly going down year over year, on top of the cost of goods going down. In that kind of environment where we are seeing generally prices at least rationalizing from a sky-high pace of inflation over the last couple of years, why are consumers telling us that they're expecting more inflation going forward?
Well, I think the simplest model of what's going through consumers' minds, they're not running sophisticated models of the form that you are or that your viewers might be. They're going to the store. And so generally, one of the best ways of predicting inflation is whatever's currently happening is going to continue to happen. And all the rest of the other stuff, what's going on with import prices or oil prices or the output gap, is just a slight modification of that. And consumers, of course, also are incredibly responsive to the most salient prices. The most salient prices obviously being gasoline, and I think beyond that, food. And so consumer inflation expectations tend to track those things a little bit too much. Now, the problem with this, of course, is what's not salient. Well, the cost of healthcare, the cost of education. But these things are a huge part of the consumer basket. The cost of housing as well. And so inflation expectations often, or perceptions, may not track reality particularly well at important points because we're a little bit too focused on what we see at the store and not what really matters.
So what do you think policymakers will focus on then, perceptions or reality?
Well, every policymaker I talk to gets told they should look at the darn data. Now, if you're talking about political policymakers, they've got two jobs. One is to figure out what's going on, and the other is to convince the electorate to re-elect them. Some of the genuinely silliest commentary we get on the economy, including and particularly on inflation, comes from congressional representatives, because they're always looking for the juiciest, least representative soundbite that helps their side the most. I worry that if you spend your whole time, all day, every day saying, for instance, Biden-flation has caused the price of dinner rolls to skyrocket, that you might eventually start to believe it. So I think those folks, I really do worry about their view on the economy. Now, I know Jay Powell and our friends at the Fed are a little more sophisticated. They're focusing on the real data. They've got folks poring over every line of those of the CPI, of the PCE, and so on. And I think they're telling pretty much the correct story, which is that inflation is moderating. There are good reasons to be optimistic it may moderate. One of the most notable things that has happened over the past year, really, is that Jay Powell has started to talk about inflation in terms of supply shocks. That's a real optimism that the bad times were due to supply and the supply shocks are behind us, which gives you a whole lot of reason to feel optimistic that the better times are ahead of us.
This sort of speaks to the whole immaculate disinflation idea, that it was just a supply shock right-siding itself, and that there was this transitory, it's sort of back to transitory without saying the T word, which they were pilloried for. How much are we now starting to see demand side pick up for that, especially with real wages actually turning positive in a more material way with how much inflation's coming in?
Well, what really matters for inflation is what's going on with nominal wages. What matters for your quality of life is, of course, real wages. And nominal wage growth has been, fairly moderate, not far off what would normally be consistent with 2% inflation if you think about, inflation plus productivity. And I think now you've got to have inflation plus productivity plus a little bit of catch up for real wages having not kept up for all of that time. So, I see every reason to feel optimistic. There's a deep question here. The big question you just asked, Lisa, is this about supply or is it about demand? But actually on the supply side, is it just a bad supply shock exiting the system? Or maybe are we actually on the cusp of a positive supply shock? Are we seeing productivity rise at levels we haven't seen before? Are we seeing the economy expand without generating inflation? And we are. That might be what's going on with the immaculate disinflation. And you might say, hey, what caused this positive supply shock? And I'm going to tell you, Lisa, I've never seen a 3-year period in my entire history as an economist in which I saw this many businesses reorganize what they did. We reorganized the economy at a really fundamental level, everything from work from home to supply chains to global shipping routes. And maybe, just maybe, that's pushed back the frontier of what's possible. And I'm optimistic that's possible, but I think perhaps more interestingly for your viewers, I'm definitely hearing a sense from Jay Powell and the Fed that they're starting to believe that maybe is what's happened.
Are you going to be shopping today, Justin?
Well, I've got a phone and I've got 2 thumbs and I've got a really big wish list, so sure.
Well, good luck with all of that. Justin Wolfers, come back again. We love having you on. Justin Wolfers of the University of Michigan, thank you and have a wonderful holiday. Talking about take profits, this is really an exciting conversation for me because I have been on a kick that if you don't spend your points now, you're going to lose them. And we've been point savers, very much so when it comes to airlines, when it comes to hotels. You save them and you save them, you save them, and it feels good. But it doesn't really. Brian Kelly is here to explain why it's a terrible idea to do what I have done for so long. Founder of The Points Guy. Let's talk about points inflation. How real is it?
Well, Lisa, you're not a point saver, you're a points hoarder. And so many Americans are as well. We get anxiety when it comes time to redeem them. It looks really nice to have a lot of points, but here, listen to me, everyone out there, use your points. The airlines have officially become banks. A lot of airlines are making more money selling their miles to credit card companies than they are by flying planes, which means there's more and more miles in the ecosystem, and the amount of miles it takes to travel is real. In fact, Southwest Airlines just announced in 2024, their points are going to be worth less when you redeem them. So key message, use your points now. Take that cold hard cash that you would have spent on the travel and put it towards other things.
I feel like I have to do some kind of, hi, my name is Lisa Abramowicz, and I'm a points hoarder. I would like to improve my standing in the world. Brian, how much are you seeing companies have to offer perks, have to offer something to really induce customers to come in, especially as you're starting to see discounts to airline prices and hotel prices, given people have traveled all they want, and now they're kind of pulling back a little bit?
Yeah, this is actually really good news for consumers, because I feel like for the last 3 years, every time I came on and did segments, it was bad news, rising airfare. Airfare at one point was raising 20% month over month. And we thought like 6 or 7% inflation was bad. So travelers have been hit the hardest. Finally, we're seeing a reprieve in those fares. And the airlines getting hit the worst are the budget, domestic carriers, because there's still huge demand for international. International airfares, especially in business and first class, are through the roof. It's domestically where the airlines are having trouble. And we're seeing, $111 fares to Puerto Rico this winter, $69 to Miami. 2 years ago, you couldn't fathom $69 to go to Miami. It was, as one of the top places to go. So there are good deals out there for consumers right now.
Brian, can you talk a little bit beyond airlines? Where are you seeing the greatest points deflation, I guess, as these points give you no benefit over time to hoard? Is it beyond airlines? Is it also car points for car rentals, points for hotels? And are there differences between those sectors?
Yeah, so car rental programs are pretty much useless. There's been so much consolidation there. There's only one or two main players. With car rental companies, it's more about the perks and getting elite status. So if you've got an Amex Platinum card, you may get elite status with, National or Hertz. So that's really where I would say, booking directly with car rental companies, it's all about recognition, not waiting in that line. The points are pretty meaningless. Hotels are actually pretty valuable. I would say World of Hyatt just won Best Loyalty Program at the Points Guy Awards. Hyatt's a great program. They've been acquiring more hotels, and they are a transfer partner of Chase. So that's the program that I like using the most. You can easily get 2 or 3 cents per point in value. But Marriott and Hilton are also pretty good programs. But here's my key tip when it comes to loyalty. Don't be loyal to a hotel or an airline. Be loyal to a credit card. The credit card companies are where it's at, because you can accrue points in Amex, Chase, or Bilt, and then you transfer them to a number of different partners. And this allows you to not just bank with one airline or hotel, it gives you a lot of different options when it comes time to redeem.
What about the credit cards that aren't giving you points necessarily to spend on travel, but for instance, Amazon's credit card, which gives you, credits to spend back at Amazon, or other credit card companies that give you points to spend at retail? How should we be approaching those points systems?
Yeah, if you want cash back, I recommend just getting a straight up cash back card. The Citi Double Cash basically gives 2% back, no annual fee. That's the gold standard. So instead of getting with one retailer that might have some wonky earning, and the Amazon card is pretty good actually for those who shop a lot at Amazon, but instead of just banking with one retailer, get an overall cash back card that gives you flexibility, because if you get cold hard cash, you can use it if you want travel or on anything else versus with just one retailer.
Mm-hmm. It strikes me that why should any company, why should a Delta, United, American try to cater to their loyal clients if this really is the business model, if it's really just about them being an arm, a loyalty arm tied to a credit card company?
Well, think about it. You might only fly a couple times a year, but you're using your co-branded credit card every single day. And that's where I think Delta in their recent earnings said 1% of total GDP spend in America is on a Delta co-branded Amex card. So think about that. Even that infrequent traveler, Delta's earning money when you go to the grocery store, when you pay for, all your expenses in your life. So it's a brilliant business model to bring people in, to give them these points, and then encourage them to fly on the airline, letting them board early. So, I will just say, while there's been devaluation in currencies, it costs more miles than ever before. You can also earn more miles, and the U.S. is very particular. You can get 100,000 point sign-up bonuses, earning 4x, 5x in certain categories. So not all is lost. You just got to play the game correctly and use the credit cards that reward you where you're spending the most money.
What's the most extravagant trip you've ever taken using only points?
Well, I do love Emirates. Emirates first class on the A380 is an iconic experience. I took my parents on an around the world trip, And they've got a big onboard bar, and my dad and I were drinking, I think, $300 a glass.
Okay, Brian is my new hero.
We flew over the Himalayas, and it was like $200 out of pocket in taxes and fees. We were getting that first class experience cheaper than what people paid in coach, and that's why I love points.
Oh. Brian Kelly, founder of the Points Guy. We all aspire to be you. Brian, thank you so much for being with us, flying around the world with his parents, drinking $300 cocktails.
Amazing.
In Emirates Air. Subscribe to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live every weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can watch us live on Bloomberg Television and always on the Bloomberg Terminal. Thanks for listening. I'm Lisa Abramowicz, and this is Bloomberg.